Hello, I'm John Klobuchar with Innate, and I'd like to welcome you to our latest webinar in our Project Cost Management series. Today's webinar is titled, Build Your Treasure Trove of Historic Data. Our presenter today is Rick Deans, who is the Executive Vice President of Industry Engagement at Innate. In his role, Rick works with Innate's largest and most strategic customers to ensure they're continuously getting value from the use of our tools. This includes working with clients during the pre- and post-implementation phase. He also heads up Innate's Industry Advisory Group, which provides valuable feedback to the company around industry best practices and product roadmap validation. Rick was part of the original Hard Dollar team and has been working with Innate customers for over 20 years. If you have any questions as you watch today's webinar, please submit them to webinars@innate.com. Again, that's webinars@innate.com. Also, today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out a link to the video within the next week. Once again, we're glad you've joined us, and now let me introduce Rick Deans, who will take it from here. Rick?
Well, thank you, John, for the warm introduction. For those of you who have been attending these webinars, I'd like to welcome you back. We have what I think is a very pertinent topic, especially in today's marketplace. And for those of you who are attending this series for the very first time, we're really excited you chose today to be with us. We hope you find this to be an engaging and educational format to exchange industry ideas. So the whole idea here is to talk about preserving and organizing and leveraging historic data. Think of it as a treasure trove, if you will, and we'll explore different facets of that. So for instance, one of the things we're going to take a look at are some best practices to develop and maintain parameter-based questionnaires. We'll also talk about leveraging an estimate storehouse. We'll talk about not only the initial build out of rate libraries. We'll talk about how some tips and tricks and tools to maintain those as we go, as prices change. And we're also going to talk about templatizing estimates as well. So each of these will be explored in detail, as well as leveraging historic data. But let's talk about some industry trends and really try to validate if the data that's out there should really encourage us to begin thinking about the importance and the value of retaining our organizational data and knowledge, if you will. So those of you who have been around the industry for a while, there was a big topic of discussions that began several years ago, what they call the graying of the workforce. And I wanted to bring up some stats that might support this. So according to the U.S. Department of Labor, right now there are more job openings than people looking for work. Anecdotally, I know a lot of folks, I guess I could be considered in that baby boomer population curve. And a lot of folks were considering retiring, 10, 12 years ago. And many of those folks actually delayed retirement due to the recession that kicked in around 2007, 2008. So we're seeing those folks actually leave positions that they've held for many, many years. And frankly, there's not enough skilled young people coming into construction to take their place. That's sometimes known in the industry as a skills gap. But let's explore some average ages across different industries. So let's start with our industry, construction. The average age in construction, about 42. I think it's 41.5, 41.6 years old, but call it 42. Retail, about a 7-year age gap there, about 35. You get into industries like high tech, and we're talking about the average age being around 30. Now, this was an interesting set of data. They actually took these numbers from some high-tech companies, and some of the companies interviewed actually had an average age of less than 30. And then just to really hopefully bring this point home, the average age of a welder in today's construction industry is 55 years old. So you can see that, we talked about earlier sort of a skills gap. There's not enough people, young people coming into the industry to take the places of these people that are going to be retiring soon. And frankly, I don't know what your experience with millennials has been, But I don't think millennials really look at construction as an exciting industry that they want to go into. I think there's a lot of things, positive things being done in the industry to address that. So what's historically or traditionally been known as a skills gap might actually be better termed as an interest gap. So this data leads me to believe as key employees are getting ready to retire, there's really an urgent need to capture the knowledge and the stuff between their ears that's really helped them in their careers, so that the next wave of folks don't necessarily have to work 20 years in the industry to be able to leverage 20 years of industry experience. So again, let's get into the sort of the meat and potatoes of the webinar, of the presentation. So let's take a look at this first numbered point here, and that's best practices to develop and maintain parameter-based questionnaires. So again, we're gonna talk about parameter-based questionnaires. What is a parameter-based questionnaire? Well, as an estimator, I want to estimate something, and maybe what's required is some input of specific variables. So the idea behind these questionnaires is really to guide users through the input of those key variables. And these are pre-set up or pre-programmed, if you will. I don't want to use the term programming, but they're designed and they're configured so that there are some calculations on the back end based on those inputs that drive very detailed results. And a best practice would include, for instance, allowing for all potentially needed resources, productivities, QA/QC steps, etc. You'll notice on the slide it actually says worst case productivities. Spent a lot of time talking to our customers about this and the way they like to manage their data. They realize, if we're going to make a mistake, I'd rather be conservative and guess that it's going to take us longer than it needs to. It may preclude us from being the lowest bid on a job, but what's the flip side of that, right? We get a job with a very aggressive or a very optimistic productivity rate, and we may end up losing money on it. So we'll take an example of how this works. Once the user has input those variables and the results are manifest in the estimate, those results can be edited once they've been added to a working estimate. So let's take an example of this. I'm going to hop into the Innate estimate tool really just to show us, give us a little additional backdrop on this. And here I'm just starting to put an estimate together, and you can see this is my working estimate. And as a user, I would come in here and I'm going to just simply right click with my mouse, and I'm going to say I want to insert what we call a cost item assembly as a subordinate line item to the row I've highlighted. So pretty straightforward. I'm going to insert a cost item assembly as a subordinate, and I'm going to get a list of the various cost item assemblies that are available to me in this particular project. So I can choose, for instance, here's a pipe assembly, and I'm going to come in here. In fact, here's an interesting one, this warehouse wizard. We're going to select that one. And from a user's perspective, I'm really given some different views of the data. Up here in the upper left, these are my inputs, and you can see they can already be pre-populated with default values. So as a user, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to put together this estimate for a warehouse, and you'll notice over on the right, this particular field supports pictures. You can put in drawings. You can kind of give a numbered approach to filling out the form, but in this case, I'm just simply going to put in some variables. The warehouse is going to be 1,500 feet long. It's going to be 600 feet wide. It's going to be 40 feet tall. And you can kind of see what I'm doing here, right? From a user's perspective, it's asking me things like column-based spacing. What's the exterior wall system going to be comprised of? Many of these fields, as you'll notice, take numeric inputs, but we can also ask the user to pick from a predetermined list of values. So in this case, our exterior wall system, maybe it's going to be a concrete block. All right, and then in this particular example, we've even got questions down to the number of dock doors, office square footage, and the number of parking spaces. So again, I've answered 9 questions, and you'll see down below is what we call a preview of what's going to land in the estimate. Now, all of these blue values that are underscored, these are the results of calculations based on those inputs. And you can even see within the cost items themselves, there are specific resources, again, each with quantities, each with unit rates, that are really going to drive our estimate. So down here in the lower right part of the screen, I'm just going to hit OK. I've made my inputs, and now I've got a pretty detailed estimate with all of this good information based on some inputs. So going back to our theme about preserving organizational knowledge, typically there's a group of people within an organization that would be building these out, but they would be available to be used by all of the users. The blue shading in the background tells me that these are read-only values. So for instance, it's going to be difficult for me to come in here and edit any of these values without coming back and saying, I want to edit my cost item assembly inputs. So very common thing that we face in the industry. We work on projects that have 30, 60, 90% complete with the engineering and design and the plans. So maybe I've put in some information based on what I know about the work. I can always come back in here and edit those inputs as I learn more about the work. And then you might have seen it on my right-click menu. There's also an option to break the cost item assembly link. So in this case, maybe I've leveraged this historic data. I'm able to use these tools to develop a shell of an estimate, but now I want to come in here, break the assembly link, in which case it's telling me that, I can't unring that bell. Are you sure you want to continue? I'm going to say yes. And now all of these values are editable as if I've just input them directly into the tool. So lots of different ways that you can interact with this set of tools. Those options that I showed are also governed by our built-in security. So we can determine who has the ability to create those cost item assemblies, who has the ability to use the cost item assemblies, who has the ability to break the links, etc. All right, so again, the purpose of these cost item assemblies is to really guide the users through the input of those key variables. As we saw, those back-end calculations drive those detailed results. And again, as in our example, we ended up with 45 detailed line items based on the input of 9 variables. And once we've completed that process, we can break those links to edit and add to our working estimate. And then finally, as we're kind of managing these cost item assemblies, we might want to take advantage of different data fields to help us organize the numerous cost item assemblies we might have put in. So for instance, I'll just jump back in the live tool here. If I come up under my setup section of the ribbon, I can come under where I keep my cost item assemblies. And again, this can be secured. But we've used this tag to help us organize these. So if I wanted to maybe group this by my tag value, I can see that I've got my cost item assemblies organized by discipline. That's just one way you could organize them. You could organize them by type of project they might be useful for. You can organize them by the user who put them together. So lots of different ways to leverage that data and to make it easy to look for what you need when you're in the heat of battle. So again, they can be labeled by discipline, CSI division code, whatever might make sense for you and your organization. So let's talk about the next bullet on our list here, and that's leveraging an estimate storehouse. So if you want to think about what we just saw, our cost item assemblies were almost like a production factory, right? We had some raw materials, which were our inputs, and we kind of poured those into the front end of that machine, and out the back end we got a really detailed estimate as a result of that. Think of an estimate storehouse as sort of the next step in that process. We've already estimated these line items, and they're sitting on the shelf. They're ready to go. All we need to do is know where to grab them, and we don't really need a whole lot of user input other than maybe updating some quantities, or again, understanding what's specific or unique about this project that would require some change. So this would be sort of the next logical step. Now we've got all of these estimate details fleshed out with crews, other resources, materials, productivity rates, and we want to easily add them into a new estimate. So again, the storehouse can be arranged by type of work, CSI division, master format, InEight format, whatever makes sense. We've got a lot of customers that do a lot of public work, and maybe that they've organized their storehouse estimate or estimates by owner or agency. We have a lot of customers that do above ground as well as underground pipe work, and they may want to organize their storehouse based on diameter, metallurgy. Is it carbon steel, stainless steel? If they're doing underground pipe, maybe they have a different setup that they would use for something that's deeper than 8 feet versus something that's between 2 and 3 feet deep. Those of our customers that do a lot of earthwork, maybe they want their storehouse to be arranged by things like soil conditions or haul distances. Maybe for short hauls we can use scrapers, and for longer hauls we want to use backhoes and trucks, etc. So that can all be preset, and again, these can be organized so that they're easy to find what you're looking for. So let's jump into the live tool and see an example of this. I'll just flip back to that project that we were in where we created the warehouse. So there's a few different ways of doing this. One way is to just jump directly into that storehouse and start grabbing things. So I've got a public agency storehouse that I've set up over here. And if I wanted to grab, for instance, some pay items from this list, I know that this project is going to contain these 4 or 5 things. I can just simply highlight those. I can copy those, navigate over to my working estimate, and go to the similar screen here where I'm going to set up my pay items. And I can just simply paste those in to my existing estimate. And you'll notice that there's an option here to copy not only the pay items, but all of their assigned cost items. So I get all that rich detail, the resources, productivity, etc. And so once I do that, it'll ask me for each cost item, where do I want to get the cost basis, my shift arrangements, all of that good stuff. I'm going to say bring that in from the settings that I've already set up in this current working estimate. So these are the line items that I've brought in. Let's jump over to the cost breakdown structure, or the CBS, to sort of look at the details that came along with those. And you can see not only did it bring in the header items that I chose, but it brought in all of the supporting details. There could be coding structures associated with these things that tie back to other systems that I want to integrate with. You can see inside of the details here, I'm going to double click on this install feeder controls. It brought over all of the resources as well as the duration or the productivity associated with that piece of work. So again, a lot of our customers will say, gosh, we don't want to sit here and estimate all of these line items from scratch every time. There's some great organizational best practices that we want to include with these line item estimates. And again, getting back to the theme of this presentation, being able to maintain this as you go. And when I talk to our customers, very few of them argue against the need to build this sort of library of data, but most of them will say, gosh, there's only so many hours in a day. Well, that's great. I can sit here and estimate a new item, and maybe this is the first time I've seen this, and maybe I'm getting into a new line of work and I'm expecting to see this over and over again. Maybe I just simply take this new item of work and I do exactly the opposite of how I began this exercise. I take this out of my working estimate once I've got my materials and my resources and my crews in there, and I copy it up to my storehouse and I label it so it's available for me. when I need it up there. So that's certainly one way of doing it, just reaching into that storehouse and grabbing the data. Another way of doing it is to use some of the built-in tools we've got in the software. So for instance, we have what we call a bid wizard, and this particular bid wizard is going to help me populate the details of something that's already in my estimate, and it's going to walk me through that. So I'll just bring this screen up, and we can see this a little bit bigger, but I'm going to select to populate this particular item of work. I'm going to bring up my agency storehouse. So again, that could have had a tag or a filter on it. And then I'm going to go into this next field and I'm going to say, okay, this item is actually a 36-inch reinforced concrete pipe culvert, class 3. And I'm just going to finish it. And then you'll see what it did. It brought in all of the estimate details, the line items, as well as the crews, productivity rates, etc., that are required to do that sort of work. Now, again, we also realize no two jobs are exactly the same. Even at the line item level, there are going to be some differences. But again, we're starting from sort of a best practices approach. If I wanted to change productivity rates based on what I know about the unique conditions of this project, or add additional resources or remove resources, I've got that flexibility, but I'm spending 100% of my available time editing those details and reviewing those details, not hard coding them in or typing them in or thinking through something that someone else has already thought through in my organization. All right, and then finally, I just wanted to show one more option. We have this new job bid wizard that allows me to create a new job. And this is going to walk me through different steps. Do I want to bring in pay items? Do I want to bring in cost items? I'll choose pay items. And again, I'll choose my public agency storehouse as the source. And I could have several jobs listed here. And what's cool about this is it'll actually do a lookup on those pay item numbers. And if it doesn't find any in this public agency storehouse project, it might look in the next one or the next one or the next one until it finds a match. And then I've got some options here. How do I want to bring in certain data? And ultimately, it's going to present me with a list of all of those items that are in that public agency storehouse. So if this job just involved some mobilization, clearing and grubbing, a manhole, and a retaining wall, I could just selectively choose which items. I could adjust the quantities now. I could wait until the wizard completes and adjust them later. Maybe there's some inputs I want to create that are going to drive those quantities. And now it's telling me the job has been created. And if I come over here and look at my estimate, it brought in all of those details that were part and parcel of that storehouse that I'd created earlier. So a lot of our customers, again, would say they really want their estimators focusing on reviewing the work, making adjustments that are germane to the uniqueness of this project, and not necessarily running around the office saying, what are the standard steps that we want to perform every time we pour a retaining wall. So again, these newly estimated items, if I did create something new in this estimate, I could fairly easily, or maybe there's a work process I go through to tell my administrator there's a candidate for inclusion in the storehouse. Maybe there's a review process. We sit there and talk about it, and then that gets uploaded to the storehouse so that other folks are able to use that as well. All right, so again, a lot of this stuff we can use to, these are just different attributes that we can use to organize the data in our storehouse. All right, so let's talk about building and maintaining rate libraries. So the key to any good estimate is a set of applicable rates. Typically when we think of rates, we think of things like labor rates, equipment rates, what's the cost of materials. But we're also going to touch on either third-party data. So as many of us know, there are commercial databases available that contain costs of commonly performed work activities, construction activities. They might be averaged for a particular region. But these are things that maybe we want to use as a first blush. So we can talk about that, as well as proprietary data. We've got many customers that have been in business for many years, and they've built libraries or archives of different work activities with productivity rates, etc. And we typically refer to those as norms. What is the norm for removing the inlet on a particular size valve? How many man hours should it take under ideal conditions to do that? So again, let's go back to the concept of keeping with the theme of building these as we go. Sometimes, customers tell us, well, it's going to take a while for us to build out a library of all of the potential materials that we would ever use. We're an underground piping contractor, and there's all kinds of T's and Y's and fittings and valves that we would potentially use. And yes, we want to get our arms around all that data, and we want to have a complete list of all of that pricing that's available to us at our fingertips. Well, that is certainly one approach. Another approach might be to build that library as we go. So again, those of you who have been with us on these webinars, you know that sometimes we talk about the 80-20 rule. Well, maybe we want to use the 80-20 rule. So in this case, maybe rather than wait until we've input 100% of the materials we could potentially ever use, maybe we focus on the 20% of the stuff that's on that list that we might use 80% of the time. And then we can also organize these rate tables by year, by geography. Many of our customers will do union as well as non-union types of projects. So maybe there's going to be a difference in labor rates and burdens. Maybe we want to create that sort of a distinction as well. And then these are easy to maintain, either annually, biannually, whenever the rates change. We can update our tables as well. In fact, we've built integrations with a lot of our customers' back-end ERP systems that can automate this process. So let's talk about working in an estimate and making some selections, and really what that might look like when we're estimating in a project. So for instance, here's a project I'm working in, and what I did initially when I started working in this project was I referenced the library, which contains a master list of all of the resources I would ever need. And I can selectively choose for my labor, for my equipment, for my materials. Do I want to use specific rates? So this is really a set of selections that allows me to choose which set of rates I want to pull into this estimate. And there's an icon or a button over here on the right that allows me to import those filtered resources. Now keep in mind, this can be done iteratively as well. So maybe I'm working in an estimate. I brought in the 2018 rates, and I get an email from my administrator saying, hey, we just updated the library with the fresh 2019 rates. Please use those. I can come in here, change my selections, and import those filtered resources. And when I do, I'll be prompted that I have the ability to overwrite those rates with the fresh ones from the library. So that's very helpful as well. A lot of our customers will tell us that maybe they've estimated a project and they've submitted a bid proposal, and the client says, well, thanks, but we ran into some funding issues. We're going to put this project on hold. And then they get a call back a year or two later, and they're asked to, when can you start? And then the question is, well, wait a minute, the rates have changed. I can submit a new estimate fairly easily for you. And they can just come in here and affect those settings and produce basically a new estimate literally within minutes. Another thing that a lot of our customers like as well is if I've actually changed the cost of my resources within this estimate, it doesn't necessarily affect that master library. So we all know cases where maybe the cost of materials on this project is going to be different than my standard rate because of fill in the blanks, right? Because of the uniqueness of the location where we need to ship them to, or because of the time of year when we're ordering the materials, or because of some sort of shortage. etc. So there's always going to be job-specific issues that are going to impact our rates. But after we've completed an estimate, maybe part of our process is to take a look and see what's different between this project and the master list. So you'll notice there's a button up here that says Copy Job Resources to Library. And when I do that, it's going to break these into two different groups for me. It's going to show me those resources that have a match in the library, but that have been modified in this project file, in this estimate. And then it'll also show me a group of resources that have been newly added to this project where it didn't find a match in the library. And with the modified resources, all I need to do is scroll over a couple columns and I can see really what the new value is. We color code that for you, so you can see that the new unit cost for this material is $15.48 and the library has a different value, etc. So again, this is something that can be secured. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, yeah, I want to move all of this stuff up to the library. So I can say for the 229 newly added resources, let's push those up, and let's push up our 2 modified resources as well. Or I could uninclude all of those 229. Maybe that I need to sit and review that with somebody, but I can selectively choose 3 or 4 resources to push up as well. So again, a lot of flexibility around how maybe we want to manage the master set of resources that are available to every estimator that's creating a project. And then after I've done some work in an estimate, maybe I want to update that master list with data from this specific project. There's also a nice feature here that allows us to update the cost, typically of materials and supplies, things that would have been quoted by specific vendors. The awarded quote, typically the lowest quote received from the market, that can update sort of our placeholder or plug number in the library as well. And we did talk about cost libraries, so I'll come back to the CBS here and I'll scroll to the bottom and I'll just add in a new item so you can see how this works. And in this case, I'm going to leverage an integration that we've built with some commercially available cost databases. So you can see there's an opportunity here to add subordinate cost items. And again, these are some tools that are out on the market. And I'll just show you what the interface that we built looks like. The back-end data belongs to those cost data library providers, but I can come in here and choose which set of data I want to bring in. Maybe I'm looking at a specific city or state, so I can get an average cost of labor and materials. And I would just sort of scroll through, or sometimes we use the term tree through the data and find what I'm looking for. Here's a 1/2 inch Schedule 40 red brass pipe. Here's a 1 inch Schedule 40. I can add those in. I can adjust the quantities. There's going to be 5 of these and 12 of these. And then I can just simply hit OK. And then those individual cost database line items will be added, just as we said, as subordinate or as children under my highlighted new item here, complete with all of the details and the unit costs that are in those cost libraries. So again, maybe as an early swag, I want to leverage those databases as a placeholder. Maybe I want to come back later and dial in my crew and my productivity rates. Maybe this is something that I need to go to market with, but at least I've got some sanity check numbers in terms of what common prices for those items may be. All right, so we're moving through our list here. Let's talk a little bit about templatizing estimates. So all of the stuff that we've reviewed today can be built and preloaded into a template. So really, what is a template? Well, one way of thinking about a template would be a standard cost model by project type. And what's really nice about this is if we have a standard cost model that we use for specific types of projects, everybody on the team should know how all of those costs combine and roll up to different levels within the cost breakdown structure. And that also allows for everybody to know where to look for specific items. So again, if we didn't have a structured format, I might build my estimate out completely different than someone else. So for instance, I might want to organize my estimate by phase of the work. Phase 1, we're going to do all this, underground stuff. Phase 2, we're going to do all of our footings. Phase 3, we're going to build all of our surface buildings, etc. Maybe we want to do that instead by discipline, right? Maybe I want to list out all my earthwork items, all my concrete items, all my electrical items. So organizationally, we should have those discussions, and we should figure out the best way that we as an estimating team should put our projects together. And we can templatize that. We can put that in a template, so it doesn't matter who's starting the estimate, whether I'm starting it or Bob or Susie or Jeff or Joe. We all begin with the same data and the same structure, and everything rolls up in a very standardized way. It really makes it easy for those who are reviewing estimates to do so, because they might become accustomed to looking for specific things in specific places. The templates can also include what we like to call a laundry list of indirect cost items. So, for instance, this is a list of things that you should always consider as far as the direct work is concerned, certainly, but also the indirect work. Do we have some built-in contingency? Do we have a small tools allowance? Do we have some general and administrative costs included in our estimate? Or do we have to go around every time and kind of think those things through? It's just so much easier if they pop right into the estimate for us, and then ultimately we can choose based on, again, what we know about the specifics of this project. Should we leave them in there? Should we increase their quantities? Should we make some adjustments to those? Should we delete them? We don't need them. In this case, we also have a means of suspending those items, which means we can basically, it's like a light switch. We can turn them off, knowing that at some point later we might want to turn those back on. And another nice thing about the templates is that the users can use templates as a basis for new projects, but we can also implement some security that would disallow them from going directly into the template and making changes. And let me just give a real world example here and see if this resonates with anyone in our audience today. But as an estimator, maybe I'm working in an Excel file, and it's been explained to me the first step when you get the Excel file is you make a copy, you save it locally, and then you start estimating. Well, I got distracted. I opened up the template. I started putting my estimate together, and after I've estimated 3 or 4 line items in detail, I realize, oh gosh, I'm still working in the template. Now, of course, if you're a regular follower of this webinar series, you'd know not to do that, but there might be people out there that have tried to back their way out of a template, and I think I've cleared out all of the contents for the cells. I don't think I changed any formulas. I don't think I hurt that VLOOKUP when I inserted that row, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a more managed process where everyone can start with the same set of data, yet there is some ability to secure and lock down that back-end data that everyone's starting with. And just an example of what the templates may look like, I can come into the tool and I can say I want to create a new project, and it's going to ask me what's the source of the new project. I'm going to say I want to create a job from a template, and maybe I've got my templates organized by infrastructure, power, maybe I've got a turnaround project, wastewater treatment plant, etc. So that would be my starting point for an estimate, and then I could give it a new estimate code. So maybe I'm doing a wastewater treatment plant in the Phoenix area. Or give it a project number, whatever my coding convention is. But when I start the new project, it's going to load in our best case scenario, or our best practices approach to doing this type of work. So again, it can be organized by, here's my site work, here's my building concrete structure, and all of this great stuff is in here as a starting point. You can see down at the bottom, there's 259 line items. So again, maybe we as an organization, we want to see all of our costs and all of our workforce hours roll up to these specific groups. And again, this is where you as an organization will decide what you want your templates to look like. We've got a lot of different customers that, for instance, are utility owners, and maybe they've got a template for their high voltage transmission work, their distribution work, their substation work. We've got companies that do shutdown, turnaround, and outages, and maybe they work primarily in refineries, and maybe their templatized structure includes a description of the type of work they're working on: fixed equipment, rotating equipment, piping, valves, instrumentation and electrical, etc. So again, these templates, give some thought to it, see how you want to build those out, and probably have to run through a few cycles, make sure that the reporting and the roll-ups are as you would expect, but they can be a very powerful tool. And again, getting back to our whole concept of let's preserve some organizational knowledge. We've got some folks that might be moving on to retirement or leaving the organization for other reasons. Let's see if there isn't a way we can capture some of that great stuff that's in between their ears and put it into a repeatable, dependable format, which we can leverage over and over again. All right, so let's talk finally about we've built all this data. So okay, yep, we've standardized the way we put estimates together. We saw the webinar. We know it's important to do it. Yep, we're going to make time. We realize we can do a lot of this stuff as we go. But really, what's the end game? And I think the end game, and not just me thinking this in terms of speaking with our customers, the concept of benchmarking pops up a lot. And really, what is benchmarking? Well, it's a way that we can validate new estimates. What does that mean? Well, I've estimated this activity and I've come up with a unit cost. How does that unit cost compare to our history? Maybe, I work in different geographic areas and the costs are all over the board depending on where we're working. Maybe I'm more interested in productivity rates. How many workforce hours or how many man hours does it take for me to put a square foot of certain forming material together? So really, benchmarks, another way to think about benchmarks is a method to detect and analyze trends. So in both of the examples I gave earlier, unit costs, well, they're all over the board. Why? Well, maybe it has to do with geography. Maybe it has to do with timing. Maybe, certain material prices are going up and that's driving up the cost of certain types of work that we do. Productivity rates. Well, maybe we're going to get a better productivity rate if we pour 100 cubic yards of concrete versus 1 cubic yard of concrete, because there's going to be some fixed costs associated with getting that crew out there and setting them up, and would just expect some efficiencies of scale as they're doing more work. And then another thing that's important with benchmarking as well is a way to sort of filter or whittle down that set of historic data based on known conditions or parameters. So if I'm an international contractor and I'm doing the same type of work in South America than I do up here in North America, maybe it's important for me to only look at projects in South America as the source of data for an upcoming project in South America. Maybe they have different productivity rates. Maybe things cost differently. Maybe I'm working for a particular client that has very stringent requirements in terms of procedural events and getting permits taken care of. So maybe I only want to look at projects that I've done for them or similar types of customers where maybe there are some additional delays that I want to account for as I'm putting my estimate together, type of facility, etc. Work with a lot of power industry professionals, and they say, if I'm working in a coal-fired power plant, that's one thing. As soon as I step foot on a nuclear site, boy, just something as seemingly as easy as changing the light switch might take all day, just based on the regulatory aspect of that. So these are different ways we can look at our benchmarks and organize our benchmarks and really make sure we're doing the apples to apples comparison as we're starting to put a new estimate together. So let's look at some of the output that we might expect when we're doing our benchmarking. So here in this first example on the left, I'm able to see where my current estimate sits relative to historic data points. Now, in this case, I'm looking at my cost per unit on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis, I'm looking at the quantities that we've performed. So the different shapes on the scatter graph tell a different story. You can see that the blue circles reference my previous estimated values, where the blue triangles represent my actuals. So here's a situation where we estimated it at one cost, it came in at a different cost. I'm way up here. We actually came in close to that on a prior situation, but we had estimated it to be lower. And then over here, again, I've had an estimated unit cost and an as-built or an actual unit cost. And my average is this orange square sitting right in the middle. So this is a trend analysis. We can see, you know, typically with maybe this particular project was an anomaly, but we can see that, you know, we're experiencing lower unit costs with the increased quantities. The graph to the right will show us maybe the increase of a particular activity over the course of time. So I can see in the past it was pretty static, but projecting out into the future, we're expecting this to become more and more expensive. And my average is way down here. Maybe I need, or my estimate is way down here. Maybe I need to take a look at why that is and see if there's an opportunity to review this again. And by the way, these color thresholds, these are all defined by the user. You can set these however you like. These are just simply screenshots. In the live application, you would hover over one of these data points and it would pop up all of the good data associated with those. So you would see what your quantity was, what your cost per unit was, your man hours per unit, which projects you're pulling from. And all of that stuff is sort of configurable on the fly as well. So it's fairly easy to determine, you know, if I wanted to change really quickly between cost per unit and workforce hours or man hours per unit, it's just a button click away and it would redraw that graph for me relative to those input variables. So we present the data in a graphical format. Picture tells picture's worth 1,000 words, right? We also show it in tabular format as well if you really want to dig down into the numbers. So again, today we've really spent our time talking about preserving organizational data. We've given you some ideas of what sorts of data that might be valuable to get your arms around. And again, when I go out and talk to people, talk to our customers, talk to prospective customers, people in the industry in general, you know, folks are doing this to some extent. The benchmarking, for instance, we're seeing a lot of this maintained in, frankly, paper, 3-ring binders on a shelf behind someone's desk. And it doesn't really lend itself well to being at the fingertips of all of those estimators that are putting out new projects. Rate libraries, certainly somewhere someone in the organization has access to that, but the question I would ask is how easily is that information shared? How quickly is it updated as prices change? We've talked about building a series of takeoff questions, right? So what are the key variables? What are going to be the important things that you really want to consider, the ones that are going to have the biggest impact on a price or a cost as you're putting an estimate together? Let's make sure that those are questions that are front and center for new estimators coming into our organization to be presented with. And they might not have the answer. They might have to stop what they're doing and go ask someone. But again, if these things are built out properly, once they put that variable in there, they're going to get that back-end calculation that's going to produce the results that's specific to that variable or that input. So again, we really appreciate you joining us. We certainly have a lot of fun with these webinars. We think it's been a great year so far, and we're looking forward to continuing on. If you have some suggestions or questions, you're always free to email us at webinars@innate.com. If you're not yet a customer and you'd like to get some more information about Innate and the tools that we offer, by all means, please send us an email at sales@innate.com. And again, my name's Rick Deans. I have a lot of fun doing these, and we hope to see you soon for the next ones. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rick. Great presentation once again. To learn more about Innate as well as our project cost management solutions, visit innate.com and click on the Request a Demo button. Thank you for watching. This concludes our webinar.